Hey everyone, welcome to Chris's Corner, the corner where we talk about previous sermon and then set you guys up for discussion. I feel like that could be a good tagline.
I like how you said it.
I felt like I was doing like an intro for like a YouTube series.
Yes, your energy was on
Make sure
point.
you hit subscribe, like below.
Lower right-hand corner.
Lower right hand corner, hit the notification bell. This week, okay, one thing we were just talking about is how we film these videos on Tuesday. I don't know if you guys know that. Today's Tuesday. And so there's going to be a sermon that plays on Sunday on our online service, and then Chris is going to do a live sermon at our Strathcona site. And so inevitably,
North Van too.
North Van as well. So inevitably, we're talking about the challenges of even filming something like this, because it's like, well, maybe the sermon might change. And in this week particularly, who knows?
It likely will change.
There might be some more changes. And so we hope that this video reflects some of what Chris has taught on and that you've heard, and then sets you up for good discussion. I'm sure it will. I'm not too worried about it.
No, me neither.
But before we jump in,
Sure.
I think it's important that we talk about 21 Days of Generosity, which is kind of this annual season in the life of our church where we're inviting our church to participate in financial giving, which is going to go towards some local projects with ministry partners that we are partnered with, as well as some ministries and projects that we want to do through the Way Church. Some exciting stuff.
Totally.
I think I don't know if you guys kind of heard this, but like the Way College was just kind of like briefly mentioned by Jason last Sunday when he talked about it, and that's a pretty big thing.
Yeah.
But
now it's public. It's now been said.
Now we have to do it.
Oh man,
It
no
was an
turning
idea
back
for a
now.
while. But
it was less intimidating when we were just talking about it.
Right. Unless
a couple of us.
Unless we don't raise any money for it, and then we're off the hook, right?
Right.
But yeah, 21 Days of Generosity. I mean, small groups is even a great place to Jason talked about before you even give, like as you give, like discussing with kind of people in your community, maybe your family, your friends about generosity and maybe some of these different projects that you might be personally excited about.
One of the things we did in our group is we spent time praying for the partners. So we prayed for Whole Way House. We prayed for Promise. We prayed for, Wagner Hills. And so this past week, we actually prayed for like external partners, like the ones I mentioned. And then probably this week we'll pray for the Way College. So a lot of time just leaning in, praying for that. Cool. Pray for Alpha. Pray for these other things. And one of the cool things about these partners is we give to them regularly as a church, and there's a lot of people from the church who volunteer small groups. Some of you are connected, and that's beautiful because it's in the context of relationship and continued growing relationship. It's not just a one-off or 21 days, but it really is something we just want woven really deeply into the fabric of our community. This desire to be generous.
You talking about the people that are involved, like even Wagner Hills, like Jason Roberts is leading Wagner Hills Ministries, but he's a part of our church. Him and his family are a part of our church. But he has his own story of how he found freedom from addiction through Wagner Hills himself, and then 25 years later he's running the whole thing.
That's
and so
awesome.
It's cool to see that these aren't just we're not just kind of sending money off to these like external organizations that we don't have prior relationship with, but these are partners that we really have been kind of journeying along with for a while. So, and
I hope that people do take time to investigate more what these orgs are doing, because maybe one of these ministries really connects with your heart.
And that's actually, it's a sneaky thing we're doing, is we're kind of saying that we're using this to actually talk about these other things that we're just excited about, like the Way College. It's like, it's like one, we want to raise money for it, but also we just want to talk about it and get people excited about it.
Or something like Brave, where it's like preventative work, those who are vulnerable potentially to exploitation or trafficking, to do preventative work and mentoring. Is just a beautiful thing to get behind. So I mean, we could talk about this. You'll probably talk about this again tonight.
And if you're, all the information is available on our website. We have kind of list of all our partners and all the projects. And so if you just go to thewaychurch.ca/generosity, you can find out more information there. And we encourage you, like any time throughout these 21 days, you can give. But also encourage you guys to kind of pray and consider and discuss with people around you.
no pressure, no compulsion.
Yeah.
$5,
Just joy.
$5,000,
Yeah.
all joy,
Yeah.
right? Give money out of our hands so it gets out of our hearts.
Oh, that's
the
good.
discipline.
Yeah, that's good.
I think
Did you
it's
come up
John
with
Wesley. John Wesley,
that?
I
John
think.
Wesley.
Yeah.
John Wesley dash Chris Price.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So jumping into this is week 1 of Advent, and
we'll keep it short, probably.
Yeah.
Well,
why
who
not?
knows?
Why not?
Probably.
You know, there's so much to talk about here,
Yes.
but we can keep it short. So, you know, Chris, you talked about specifically kind of honing in on the genealogy, which to put a whole sermon on a genealogy kind of at first glance might seem a little bit like kind of boring or uninteresting. Why would we talk about genealogy? But as we unpack it, as you unpacked it really, I just felt like there's just so much to uncover there. And so why don't you, just for people who may not have been there on Sunday, just some of the recaps of like the different interesting things we pulled out of the genealogy that says, you know, something about the heart of God.
We looked at the genealogy in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 1, and Matthew has crafted the genealogy and even edited it to make theological points and to draw out certain things. And there's at least 3 things that I find fascinating about the genealogy. One, he goes out of his way to include people who weren't Israelites.
Right.
So he highlights Canaanites like Tamar and Rahab. He talks about Ruth, who's a Moabite. These were people who were not part of God's covenant, and yet they get welcomed into Jesus's lineage.
Right.
And Matthew's kind of hinting at the fact that, you know, Israel was called to be a blessing to all nations, and Jesus is ultimately going to bring that to fruition through his life and ministry. But Matthew's hinting at it in his genealogy by going out of his way to highlight these individuals who would have been outside of Israel. The other thing that's really interesting is that he highlights scandalous moments in the history of God's people and goes out of his way to do it. And maybe the best example is how he talks about David, which is a prominent name. Most people would be like, wow, David's in my lineage. King David, right? Everyone looked back at his rule as like this golden age for
like
Israel.
For the readers of Matthew, they would have been like, oh yeah, like David's the one we were looking for in that genealogy.
Yeah, this is like the better David coming. Like the
Exactly.
And then, so Matthew, like, instead of just going, David was the father of Solomon, he adds, like, it's almost a parenthesis, who was the son of Uriah's wife, Bathsheba, which is David in the most scandalous moment in his life, sleeps with Bathsheba, who's married, commits adultery, covers it up, has her husband murdered. It's this horrific story. He tries to cover it up. It's this dark moment. And Matthew goes to terrible
things to do. That's probably one of the top, top things you could do.
I mean, it's pretty. If you don't know the story, I mean, he tries to cover it up by bringing Uriah back from the battlefield so that he'll sleep with his wife, and the pregnancy won't get traced back to David. But Uriah won't do it. So it doesn't work. So David sends him back with a letter to the commander to expose Uriah to be killed on the battlefild.
And Matthew, for some reason, decides, hey, you know what would be a great glowing moment to add into the genealogy is this moment in the lineage of Jesus Christ.
Instead of editing it out, it's like you're applying for a job and you want to impress your employer. And instead of like putting what's amazing about
you add like the gap year you took to go to Australia because you were trying to discover yourself.
Exactly. You spend a night in jail.
Right.
That's the moment you. And so it's like, that's interesting. The last thing is Matthew mentions 5 women in the genealogy. There's Mary, obviously. There's Ruth. There's Rahab. There's Tamar, and then there's Bathsheba. And in an ancient patriarchal society, women were not really included in these genealogies. So it's very striking that Matthew goes out of his way to include 5. And I think what's going on here is Matthew's trying to tell us that the family Jesus came from is the family he came for.
Right.
And Jesus's family is a mess. And our families are often a mess, just like our lives can be a mess. But we can still be a part of God's family through Jesus. And a lot of what happens in the genealogy anticipates Jesus's ministry. Think of the women who are included, not excluded. At his birth, at his resurrection, and all the way in between.
Yeah.
Women are included, not excluded. Their status is elevated in this Jesus movement.
Yeah.
And we even see it at the beginning with the genealogy.
Yeah. I mean, the Samaritan woman's like a great example of kind of hitting almost all three of those things.
Yeah.
Kind of the foreigner, the Samaritan, woman from Samaria, and then this woman who's kind of in this like scandalous thing. And that, like, I love that even just from the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew, you see that hinted out, and then you see it play out throughout the Gospel of Matthew and Jesus' life.
Yeah, that's a good example. Maybe I'll use that on Sunday, because the Samaritan woman at the well is all three of those things.
Yeah.
And yet she is the first person to whom Jesus reveals his messianic identity.
Yeah.
And she is the first preacher.
Yeah, the gospel is
proclaimer.
proclaimed. Yeah, she's the
She
first
brings like her
evangelist.
town to the Lord. And so that's wild. But you see all of that's hinted in the genealogy.
Right.
And Matthew goes out of his way to include it. And let me just say, if you're new to the Bible, I mean, we don't think it's just the gospel writer making this cool, countercultural, subversive, stylistic decision. We believe the Holy Spirit superintended and inspired
Right.
the genealogy that Matthew
Yes.
wrote. So the names included are the names God wanted included. So
Yeah.
God is telling us something about his family and what he's up to in the world.
And, God wanted to include, but also like throughout history, God orchestrated this whole history over thousands of years for those stories to actually have happened, and for the lineage to have actually occurred in history. They're not just names kind of pulled from a fictional book. This is literally the story of the people of God and how Jesus' lineage came to be. And so, I love that. Before we wrap, there's one more thing and again, you might not talk about this Sunday, but I thought it was super interesting.
Right.
Kind of at the end of that lineage or the genealogy, it talks about 14 years from Abraham to David, 14 years from David to exile, and then 14 generations, and then 14 from exile to the Messiah. Well, tell me about the significance of that.
Yeah, so it's 14, 14, 14, three sets of 14. But if you compare Matthew's genealogy to the one found in 1 Chronicles chapter 3, you'll notice that Matthew has intentionally left out generations.
So again, he's trying to say something with it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he left out generations to get that 14, 14, 14. And what he's actually giving us is 6 sets of 7. And 7 is a number of significance in the Bible.
Right.
7 days of creation. 7th day is the Sabbath. Every 7th year, Sabbath rest. And then the 7th, the 49th year, was the year of Jubilee.
Right.
And so Matthew actually sets Jesus up in the genealogy as the beginning of the 7th 7. And the year of Jubilee meant the cancellation of debts. It meant the release of indentured servants. It meant year of rest and celebration for people and the land. And all of those themes of debts being canceled, slaves being set free, people being brought into the rest of God, come to fulfillment in the person of Jesus.
Right.
And Matthew wants to see that and know that through Jesus, the debt of our sin can be canceled. Through Jesus, our slavery to sin, our addiction to self can be broken. We can be set free. And then through Jesus, we can find rest.
Amen.
And one of the things we're finding rest from is religion and this striving and this desire to impress people and show others in God that we're good enough to be loved. And the gospel just sets us free from that. And the genealogy tells us that story.
So good. Well, on that note, we'll throw to you discussion leaders. Do you have some questions? And we encourage you as you discuss that. Also, make sure you spend some time maybe praying for some of those ministries in 21 Days of Generosity and discuss it as a group. I'll throw it to you.
That went well. Good.